Hey Magic fans, Mael here, and today I am so excited to tell you about something that we've been working on for a little while now. If you're anything like me, you love Bloomburrow. The set's great, aesthetics on point, cute little critters, great all around. Now, we at Crossover Comics are going to be having our Bloomburrow Standard Store Championship going on around this date. It's going to cost around this much, and if you're interested, details are in the description. Now, for anyone interested in Standard and interested in Bloomburrow, but don't really know how to get into Standard, maybe it's the budget, maybe it's a non-singleton format, making issues in deck building, do not fret. Today, I'm going to be showcasing 10 different deck styles that you can go for, featuring the 10 different creature types of Bloomburrow, starting with one that I believe many it flew over the head of, in some cases maybe literally, that being birds. Now, for birds, the name of the game is consistency. You're going to want to get in creatures on curve, dealing damage consistently, and given they're birds, flying, that's going to be consistent damage. You're going to be able to consistently get over those blockers. Now, starting off with some of the lower creatures to surprisingly very important creatures in the deck can be Harrier Strix and Miner's Guidewing. On one hand, stuff to prevent your opponents from really interacting with your board in times when you don't want them to, for example, if they have a reach blocker, and the second one being not only a good attacker in the early game, but also a late game blocker. Dies, a bigger creature you want to attack with explores, potentially a counter, bubba ding, bubba dooey. Along with that, we have some of the rare birds in the set, such as Mockingbird, which is seemingly starting to pick up a lot of traction in a lot of different decks right now. Being able to copy any sort of creature that your opponent is getting a lot of value from, if you want some of that value for yourself. Outlaws of Thunder Junction's Aven Interrupter, a pseudo counterspell, which can really put a wrench in your opponent's plans. Salvation Swan, being able to bring stuff back. Jackdaw Savior, same thing. And of course, the big man or bird itself, Castrol. Now, there are a lot of other birds currently available in Standard. However, one that I want to, well, it's not a bird, which kind of spoils it, but one card that I like to add into this, like a sort of secret sauce, is one from March of the Machine, Errant and Giada. Errant and Giada will allow you to play any of your flying creatures, or even some of the instant speed removal you might have from the top of your library, without it even having to be in your hand, which allows for a lot more versatility and just being able to keep up either potential bluffs or actual removal or creatures in your hand. It's a wonderful card to have in these sort of things. So yeah, with all of this said, the main gameplay that you'd want to go for is to slightly, let's say, tweak the game state to your favor. Let's say it's mid-range. It's mid-range. Play some low creatures in the beginning, maybe get some swings in. If your opponent seems to be setting up, you can stop them with counter spells or removal. We're talking about Azorius after all. And then once you really get the steam going, birds, 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 swing, 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 or you can just stall them out. Castrol gives a lot of different bonuses on attack, so you can just buff out with the +1/+1 counters it can give. This deck is a very versatile one, and I, well, I would suggest for all of these, but I highly suggest trying it out. Now, I will say this once, but this is an account for all of the decks I'm going to show up. Uh, in the description, you will find links to a Moxfield deck featuring all of these bird cards. It is an example deck that I made just to show off how these decks sort of play. Try it out in the playtest function on Moxfield. You can check it out for yourself. And hey, if you're ever interested in checking out any of the cards, why not buy them at Crossover Comics? Give us a call. With that being said, on to the next deck. And for the next deck we're going to be looking at, we got to take a trip to the swamps because we're talking about rats. Now, for rats, it's actually a unique case. Rats has actually gotten a fair bit of love in some of the latest sets. Not only this set, Bloomburrow, but also Wilds of Eldraine, with cards like Lord Skitter and Tangled Colony. However, the newest legendary for rats, Bren the Relentless in Bloomburrow gives a somewhat unique way of tackling how your rat deck can operate while also fitting in with just the general color identity of the mirror. So, Bren the Relentless cares about two things: having a lot of rats and having your opponent's creatures die. Now, of course, there's, combat damage, a creature dies, that counts, but we're in Demir. We've got removal. Not only removal like go for the throat and cut down, but also rats with that remove, such as gnawing vermin. When he dies, any 1/1 gone. Or Ezra Beastbinder, which can turn any big bad threat into a 2/2, and then really any of your big attackers can block, kill. That's another trigger for Ren. But even if you can't get Ren out, there are a lot of ways that this deck can still flourish. Not only with the amount of rats you're going to have, but with the other two legendaries. Those being Lord Skitter, who is going to constantly get you rats and also messes with your opponent's graveyard. So let's say if they're playing squirrels or just generally have recursion, that can put an end to that. And Charumonics, that not only gives an alternate win con of Toxic, but also helps you get more rats from your deck so that you never run out. So yeah, this deck can excel both on the offensive and the stally wally defensive in some way, as long as, of course, you can get Ren out. That being said, like I mentioned earlier, this is a Dimir deck, so we're going to want removal. I'm personally using cut down and go for the throat, but honestly, take your pick. There's a fair bit of removal still in the format even after the rotation, so you can afford to be a little bit creative with your choices. Whew. That deck can get pretty crazy, especially if you let Ren keep going. The massive rats that you can make is pretty crazy. It'd be a shame if there were another deck that can out damage it super quickly. Alright, let's talk lizards. Lizards is one of the, maybe I would say, 3 simplest decks that are going to be shown off in this video. Just play lizards, deal damage, swing for more damage, play more lizards for more damage, and at some point in there, ideally, you win the game. It's honestly a very fun deck with a very simple game plan, and from what I've seen on MTG Arena, it's a pretty successful game plan too. Now, I specifically made this deck so that no cards in it would exceed over 3 mana, even with potential offspring costs for a card you're going to see in a bit. So this deck is going to be both speedy in playing cards and also ending the game. For 1-drops, we've got Hired Claw, which pings whenever you swing with lizards, and Iridescent Vinelasher. Oh, see? I told you it was going to be quick. That you can play ping whenever you play a land, or pay for 3, ping 2 whenever you play a land. And that's on 2 bodies. The big star of the show, as one may expect, is Gev, Scaled Scorch, who will be able to not only ping your opponent even more, but also buff your ever-growing team. Especially if you play something like the aforementioned Iridescent Vinelasher with Offspring, which will now buff both of them. Although it'll only be 1 ping because it's not cat, After that, we've also got Valley Flamecaller, which is going to make all of your damages sting even more. And then finally, we also have Fireglass Mentor, who is just going to give you even more value on more value, for more pings, for more value, for more swings, for more value when you get it. However, that doesn't mean that your hand is just going to be immediately empty and it's going to be a very boring if you can't really get into that. For example, you have ways to conserve some of your mana, such as Burning Tree Emissary. I mean Flame Cash Gecko, that will allow you to do some funny shenanigans with playing something, getting the mana back, and then playing something else, maybe even another Flame Cash Gecko. And then if you have lands in hand that you know you're not going to use, you can pay to discard it, draw a card. That might be even one of the other cards that I decide to add. Outlaws of Thunder Junction's Laughing Jasper Flint. Technically, that is a lizard, and if you ever run out of cards in hand, it's fine. You can use your opponents. Finally, I rounded out the deck with some removal, some shocks if I ever need specific pings to finish the job, and the new Scales of Shale that'll allow your funny lizards to get in for even cheaper. Well, not cheaper, but free free swings. Indestructible. You get it. You get it. It's a very fun deck if you want to just play a bunch of stuff, swing now, block never, and then finish games within 5 minutes whether you win or lose. It's a very just throw everything to the wall deck, and it works wonderfully at that. Swapping from red black to red green, next we're going to be talking about my personal second favorite creature type in this set, raccoons. Now, raccoons in this set are an interesting bunch, as they want you to spend a lot of mana on spells, 4 or more, but they also, most of the cards that care about that don't cost a lot. So, if you want to build a deck with a lot of them, you might need to get creative with some of the ways you do it, but luckily for us, we've got a lot of raccoons to work with. Now, how the deck works is cleanly exemplified by the main leader, Wera. It's fairly simple. Get mana, use that mana to play raccoons, use abilities like Muera's Expend 4, or for example, Byway Barterer's Expend 4, to get more raccoons, to play more raccoons, to expend 4 even more, to play more, to get more, to win. Now, to help with the early game, technically this isn't a raccoon, but it cares about raccoons, and that's good enough for me, plus it's a frog, which I love. Valley Mightcaller, 1/1 for 1, that cares about when you play raccoons, which, this is a raccoon deck. You're gonna have a lot of those. Other than that, Wandertail Mentor is the perfect 2/2. You get mana, it buffs itself whenever you expend 4. You've got Scrap Shooter, which even if the Destroy Artifact or Enchantment Gift thing doesn't go off, it's still a 4/4 with Reach, which is still pretty good. We have the wonderful Bramble Familiar from Wilds of Eldraine, whose adventure part will almost always be able to give you some sort of value, even like outside of its own ability, at least on one of your creatures' expend abilities. And because it costs 7, just by playing like one other thing with Mirror on the field, you'll even get the expend 8 ability, which works wonders. We've also got Valley Flamecaller, like in the Lizard deck, for if we need that extra oomph of damage, plus it's 3 mana, close to expend 4. We also have the Great Train Heist for whenever we want to get a big swing in, or if we just need a lot of mana for something next turn. And we've also got 2 little cheeky inclusions from my end. Take out the trash, and trash the town. They're raccoons. It's trash. I think it's funny. That's enough. So yeah, this is also a mid-rangey deck, building up a small little array of raccoons, slowly getting bigger until you feel like you can start swinging. Got a lot of options to grow that, either through getting more creatures or just buffing the creatures with expend. You also have some ways to remove creatures and some ways to draw more cards. It's a very well-rounded deck. I would also 100% recommend this one. It's very fun. Now, if you're personally a bigger fan of wider boards, now I've got a deck for you. That being rabbits. Now, the general rabbit deck loves to do 2 things. Get a token and make lots more of it. So, for example, the card that I think exemplifies this deck a lot is the tried and true Hop to It. It's very simple. 3 run ones for 3, but that is an amazing card in this deck. A lot of the cards in this deck are going to focus on either having tokens, swinging out with a lot of creatures, or just generally having tokens. For example, Beauregard Mentor gets bigger the more creatures you have, and so does Regal Bunnycorn from Wilds of Eldraine. Pollen Shield Hair's Adventure cares about having a lot of creatures, and also its base version is going to buff all your tokens. Phineas is going to buff all your tokens, and is also going to give you some card draw depending on how much you've buffed them already. And also Valley Quest Caller again, because not only buffing all your dudes, but also giving you a scry every single time you play any of them, including the tokens. Wonderful. Along with this, there's also Murder of Karlov Manor's Case of the Gateway Express, which on cast will allow for removal because usually you want like 5 or 6 creatures in this deck, which is enough to kill most creatures. And once you swing with enough, you're going to get a lot of damage boost. Well, if you have a lot of creatures. But even with just one or two, +1/+0 to your attackers is not bad. Round it out with a Warren War Leader, or maybe even two if you play the Offspring, and you've basically got the game right there. It is another very simple deck, but one that goes very wide very fast, especially with the aforementioned hop to it, and it is one that in my playtesting was very fun. So I would 100% recommend it. Plus, you can always add in a Knight Errant of Eos from Boros Convoke fame to give all of those tokens something else to do. Now, if you prefer to be more conservative with your resources, such as life, if you want a lot of it, may I introduce you to bats. Now, the plan of the bat deck is also somewhat simple. Play bats, gain life, either with them because a fair few of them have lifelink, or through other ways, such as cards that gain you life, or enchantments. For example, Case of the Uneaten Feast that gives you life every time you play a creature, including Offspring. And use that to either pay for things that are required to pay life, or just use it as a cushion, which can also be very useful in a lot of different aggro decks currently. There are a lot of different bats that fit perfectly into this playstyle, such as the two cards from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that I really like, Deep Cavern Bat and Ruin Lurker Bat, both of which have lifelink and have different synergies with the deck depending on what's going on, whether something you control has died or if you just want to mess around with your opponent's hand. Now, to exemplify this, we have two cards. We've got Lunar Convocation, an enchantment which cares about both you gaining life and losing life, and Zoraline Cosmos Caller, the main creature of the deck, and a creature that can do both of those things. Both either to buff up your own life total with swings, or to gain incremental value from bringing stuff back from the grave to the field, especially if those cards are things like Deep Cavern Bat who mess with your opponent. It is a very consistent and very resilient deck. Pair all of these synergies with cards like Essence Channeler, who gets bigger the more you gain life, or Moonstone Harbinger, who buffs all your bats temporarily whenever you gain life, or even Lost Caverns of Ixalan's Amalia Benavides Aguirre, I think I got the name right, who is going to give you both, well, either and or a lot of card advantage with lands, or a lot of counters on herself whenever you gain any life from any of the things I just mentioned. Everything in this deck benefits other things in the deck. It's very synergistic and it is so fun to play. I highly recommend it. Now shifting our attention to a deck style that cares a lot more about the non-creature than it does creature, we're going to be looking at Otters. Despite Otters caring a lot more about casting different non-creature spells, especially instants, more than having like a lot of different creatures, despite how stormy that might sound, this deck is also pretty simple. You're going to want a lot of the creatures in your deck, which most of them either have prowess or do something special on casting instant or sorcery, and then just cast, and swing. For this, the instant sorceries generally come in either two packages, that being more damage, whether that be pings like Shock or Stoke the Flames, or buffs like Monstrous Rage, which is really good, or card draw like Pearl of Wisdom, which I really love the thematics for. To the effect of what I mentioned earlier, some cards that are going to be wonderful for this deck in terms of creatures are stuff like Karscation Mage, who is going to ping for all... It's essentially mini Gutterstipe, but you can have it in two. Stormcatch Mentor, which is going to make all of your instant sorceries cheaper, along with having prowess, so it can end up doing damage. Technically, this isn't like a full-on creature, but the 1/1 prowess otter tokens that Storm Chaser's talent triggers, which in and of itself is a non-creature spell, so prowess. and Valley Flood Color, which is going to give all of your otters a lot more synergy because swing, shock, untap, they're bigger, go nuts. And to top it all off, you can add your personal choice of mix of Ral Crackling Wit and Kitsa Otterball Mage, or even a Storm Splitter or two. Although I know that some of these cards can get a bit on the pricier side, so take your pick. The deck still works pretty well, even without a large amount of any of these. It is a bit of a different deck compared to a lot of the other ones that we've talked about and are going to talk about in this video, but it is also wonderfully fun if you'd ever like to try it out. Now, onto a creature type that we've seen a fair bit of in the past, especially in Modern Horizons: squirrels. As squirrels tend to do in real life, this deck is going to have a lot of cards that care about foraging, or exiling 3 cards from a graveyard or sacrificing a food. Luckily, we're going to have a lot of ways to do so, especially thanks to Wilds of Eldraine. This deck also falls around the levels of mid-range, like a good few of the other decks shown in this video, where you can go a bit aggressive with a bunch of your different squirrels, or you could just build up your cards. There are going to be some food tokens that you might be able to sack and gain life. You can hunker down or just go in for the kill. You've got a couple of ways to do so. Starting with the 1-drops. Gingerbrute. Being a 1/1 for 1 with haste is already not bad, but also it being a food, which means it being able to be foraged, is just that icing on top of the gingerbread. And then come the general squirrel synergies. There's Vine Reap Mentor, a 3/2 squirrel that whenever it ETBs or dies you get a food token. You've got Bone Cache Overseer, which you can use to pay life to draw a card if you ever forge in a turn. You've got Valley Rotcaller, which drains every time you attack, equals the number of squirrels you control. Well, more than that, but this is a squirrel deck. And who can forget Camellia the Seed Miser, the one that's going to be running all of this. Camellia sums up the plan pretty well. It gives squirrels the menace, so you're going to want to swing with those squirrels. Whenever you sacrifice food or forage, you get squirrels, and you can buff your squirrels. It's pretty simple. To that effect, we also have Honored Dray Leader, who once you build up a fair bit of stuff, or even play it early and then it'll grow as you build up, you're going to have one massive squirrel swinging in. Pair all of this with the new Scavenger's talent, which will give you a food token whenever a creature you control dies. It's a very powerful ability. It is a pretty fun deck and a pretty resilient deck, getting access to life gain, removal, and a lot of ways to interact with your board. It's a fun deck. I recommend it. Next up is my personal both favorite deck out of these 10 and favorite creature type, and that is mice. Mice are pretty straightforward, showing exactly what they care about on most of the mice's first line of text, that being Valiant. They're going to care about being targeted with spells or abilities for the first time in the turn, and then swinging, because most of those things are buffs of some kind. Hearthfire Hero. This card, oh my god. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more stuff you play on it, and then when it dies, it pings for that much, which is very easy to get to a very large amount, because we're going to be filling this deck with very low cost buffs, such as Monstrous Rage, War Squeak, Hammerhand. There are so many options, even just in standard. War Squeak, Demonic Ruckus, Rabbit Gnaw, Monstrous Rage, Might of the Meek, and even like abilities on creatures such as Inti, Seneschal of the Sun, or even just the mercenary tokens that cards from Alonzo Thunder Junction make. You have so many options to trigger Valiant. That's just Hearthfire Hero. There's also Emberheart Challenger, who's going to get you technically not card draw, but card advantage, along with having prowess, so you're going to get some big swings in. And then, of course, the mom of the deck, Mabel. When it comes to abilities, as previously mentioned, Inti's abilities target +1/+1 and trample. Mabel makes an equipment, which can, of course, target via equip. You've got Manifold Mouse, which gives double strike or trample, or both, yeah, you will never run out of ways to trigger Valiant in this deck, which means you'll never run out of very big attacks. Very big attacks is the name of this deck. You can easily be swinging in for 8, 10, even 12 by turn 4 or 5. It is very satisfying to do so, especially when your opponent tries to kill Hearthfire Hero afterwards and then takes another 8 to the dome. This deck is just big fireballs of mice. Big mice balls. Weird analogy, but you get the point. The deck is very fun when it runs at maximum efficiency. Of all the decks, not only I suggest this one the most because of how like simple and fun it is, but also a lot of the cards are within common uncommon range. Might of the Meek, Monstrous Rage, Rabbit Gnaw, Demonic Marcus, War Squeak, Cheeky House Mouse, Hearthfire Hero, Flowerfoot Swordmaster, a lot of cards are somewhat easy to find. So, yeah, definitely check it out. Finally, the last deck that we're going to be talking about today. If you keep in track, you'll know which creature type this is. We'll be looking at frogs. Now, frogs are an interesting bunch. They care a lot about bouncing their own creatures and then replaying them for extra value, a lot of them having ETBs, literally playing leapfrog with your own creatures, which might sound like, oh, I have to replay all my creatures, it's going to cost a lot of mana in the long run, but this deck is surprisingly efficient, getting a lot of value very quickly, especially thanks to a funny little guy called Sunshower Druid. 1 mana, one counter, 1 life, and you're going to be getting that a lot. Along with that, we've got Valley Mightcaller, who gets bigger the more and more you play these frogs. You've got Mistbreath Elder, who is a 2/2 for 1, first off, who is going to facilitate these bouncing and get bigger and bigger along with Valley Mightcaller. And then we have the bouncing. Clement the Worrywart is not only going to give you more mana, but it's going to give more bouncing. Dour Portmage gives you card draw for the bounces. Three Tree Scribe gives you counters for the bounces. It's value on value on value. All you really need to do is just keep doing it. And then finally, Dream Druid Transfer not only acts as potentially removal if you want to tap down an opponent for a while, or you can tap down one of your creatures, draw 3 cards, and then bounce that creature, replay it like nothing ever happened. There's so much versatility in this. Finally, the cards that are not creatures also are wonderful for the deck, such as Murder the Karlov Manor's Repulsive Mutation, which can buff your creatures and counter a spell at the same time, or Into the Floodmaw, which is a great bounce spell in its own right, or Hunter's Talent, which whenever one of your creatures is getting really big, like the Valley Mightcaller or the Mistbreath Elder, you can use it to kill another creature your opponent controls. Great value. And value really is the name of this deck. You're going to be getting so much value from your creatures, it's going to overwhelm your opponent, whether you're holding back and just keeping the building going up and up and up, or if you want to just swing in with all your frogs. It's a great deck, it's a versatile deck, and it's a fun deck. I would recommend it. Well, I would recommend all of these, as I've been saying, but this one's fun in a very unique way. Check it out in the description. And with that, that concludes all the decks that I would like to talk about in this video. Let us know in the comments if this has spurred you into creating any decks for Standard, especially regarding Bloomburrow, and let us know what those decks are. Now, remember, us at Crossover Comics are going to be having our Bloomburrow Standard Store Championship at this time, with this price, and again, more details in the description. So I hope to see you all there with, hopefully, some fun new brews. I am so excited to see what people have brewed up with Bloomburrow, even outside of what I've looked at today. As always, thank you for watching. This is Mael, signing off.